All right, and away we go. It's all yours.
Okay, hello everybody. Let me share my screen. And I want to share that one. And share. Let me know when you can see my screen that says video
We can see
security
it.
system.
We can see it.
Very good. I think somehow I can drag this off to the side. Yep, I can. All right, that's out of the way. No, I don't want to enable AI companion. And so, all right.
They're everywhere.
Yeah, they're everywhere. Correct. Anyway.
Yeah, go ahead and just don't forget to speak up.
All right, certainly. Hopefully everybody can hear me clearly. All right, let's start with project features and objectives. This is really a multi-decade Linux-based experiment. It's still an experiment because I still play around with it. My objective was to use free and open source software. I wanted to store the videos and images locally. I don't want the cloud-based solutions that most camera vendors will offer you. And I wanted it to be event triggered such that when it senses motion, it starts recording video so that you minimize the storage space. I wanted to utilize a whole variety of video capture devices, so I played around with several of them. My other objective was to reuse older devices and operating systems. It should be generally reliable, which it is, and it does run unattended for months. And then I'll talk about some strategies for sustaining them over a power loss. And I use a combination of wired or Wi-Fi connections. There is no power over Ethernet. So those are some of the features and objectives. So I'll pause here if anybody has questions. All right. The hardware. I started with, I think, way back even with a Raspberry Pi 3B Plus, and one of them still runs that. So that particular device has only 500 megabytes of RAM. It had an 8 GB SD card, and it is running wired. The newer ones are running the Raspberry Pi 4 with 4 GB of RAM and 16 GB SD cards because I couldn't find any 8 GB SD cards at a reasonable price. And they use Wi-Fi. Now, the distinction between the two is definitely the Wi-Fi doesn't run on the Raspberry Pi, giving you the video capture rate and the performance that is required. Therefore, I use the wired, whereas on the Raspberry Pi 4, I can use Wi-Fi. Each of these is configured to be a motion server, and it uses only one camera. So that's one set of devices. I've got about 4 of these running. On another side, you can use either an Intel or an AMD PC. I would say minimum recommended is 4 GB of RAM and say 120 GB of SSD. That's what I'm using. And that's also configured to be a motion server. But in this case, it handles multiple Android phones running a software called IP Webcam. So I'll speak about each one of these and their nuances in a moment. Cameras. What did I repurpose or what did I use? Everybody, I'm sure, is familiar with the ball-like device, which is the Logitech webcam, probably a 480 by 240 resolution. I kind of abandoned those for better resolution cameras. And then I happened to come across, I bought a whole slew of these Pi cams. Sorry, I bought two Pi cams, which are shown in this one with the ribbon cable. They're supposed to be low light, but in reality, modern Android phone, not even modern Android phones, the phones like I show, the LG or the Moto, etc., have much better low light capability than those early generations of what they call the low light Raspberry Pi cameras. Then I happened to buy about 4 or 5 of these Pilot dash cams. They are 640 by 320, I think, or may even be 720. And I got them cheap. Walmart was clearancing them out. They were less than $10 each. So since we had 5 vehicles, my daughters had, each had a car and we had 2 cars. So I said, okay, each one of us is going to get a dash cam. It works with an SD card. So we bought these and installed it, ran it for a while, and then the daughters weren't using it. So I said, okay, give them back to me. I'll repurpose it. And I so discovered that you could use them purely as webcams as well. Perfect. And they come with their own infrared light. I mean, it's kind of a wimpy infrared light source, but I don't use it anyway. But they work. All right, now talking about Android phones. Probably about 12, 14 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, I bought some LG Optimus. You see a photograph of it or an image of it on the bottom right. They were cheap. I wanted to get it for the girls and said, okay, in the early days of when everybody is playing around with smart cameras or smartphones, etc., here you go. You can play with these. Get used to what is going to become almost commonplace. I still have some of those. Some of them, even the batteries went bad, so I bought replacement batteries for them. And they are running Android 2.2. And it still works as a great IP webcam with that software called IP webcam. Then came along some Moto G3s, which were CDMA phones that got, by when had to go by the wayside. And I said, no, I'll repurpose those because the CDMA whole standard was wiped out from the US and we all went to GSM. So I thought, okay, let's repurpose these phones as well. So there's a generation of them with Android 5.0 and Android 6.0 and all of that. So that's my whole purpose also has been, I like to play around with these devices and not throw them into recycle or wherever else. And it's like, what can I do with these things? They're after all computers. I came from the days of when I didn't even have a calculator. A slide rule was what I started with. So these to me are treasures. Different perspective, but hey, I'm an old timer, right? Any questions? Okay.
I had one. Do you have any, do you think there are any security concerns with running the very old versions of Android?
There might be. But there's nothing else I have on the phone that they can really steal. Whether they can backdoor into my system through that, I don't know. But it's a good question.
It's only locally accessible on your network, right? So it's
That is
not
correct.
actually. Yeah.
That is correct. It's only locally available. Nothing goes outside my house. Any other questions? Good one. Thank you.
Ken was asking, are they all using Wi-Fi?
Yes, they are all using Wi-Fi.
I don't know, do you have to have any less secure settings on your router in order to use the older devices? Or
It's almost guaranteed they're all using less secure Wi-Fi settings. WPA, or are they all guessing?
Yes. That would be true. Any other comments? Concerns?
Looking at eBay and used G3s are about $25
Mm-hmm.
or less.
Or less, right.
Running B or G, or I make sure you're kind of isolating or separating that wireless network from anything else. I'm probably using 5G for everything, but I really want to be using, any computer or something. But this could be dedicated, old slow network dedicated to the.
So you're saying I should separate it out to a different subnet?
Well, I would.
Okay. I'll take your advice. Thank you. All right, so software. I still run a couple of them on Raspbian, but the newer Raspberry Pi 4s, I'm running Ubuntu. A long time ago, when I started using Motion as a software, I was actually running it on Fedora, and that's around the mid-2000 time frame. So this software called Motion that I show the logo on the top has really been around since early 2000. The name I recall is Kenneth Leverson and a couple of other gentlemen that hold a copyright to it. And it has been really a very good piece of software. You can just sudo install it. If you want more information, you can go to those web pages that I have referenced. And now I'll talk about what it is, what you can configure on it. The version I'm running right now is 4.2.2. And there you can see the three names. The name that I recall is Kenneth Leverson. So it runs as a service in Ubuntu, as well as Red Hat Linux if you want to run it on a Fedora or Red Hat. There's a configuration file that I'm showing on the right-hand side. I'm just showing some of the essential configuration keywords. I'll go through some of them just to explain what it is capable of and what you can configure. So a couple of them, the first two where it says daemon off or setup mode off is what it comes as default. You can turn it on if you wanted to run on a command line, not in the background, or if you're setting things up, etc. Third line is telling it where to log and what your log level is going to be. And the fifth line is where do you want the images or videos, etc. to be stored, followed by what do you want the camera to be called, what is the frame rate you want to capture at, emulate motion, I've kept it off, I've never kind of used that. Threshold 1500 is really the amount of change from one frame to the other where having exceeded that value, it then says, oh, there must be motion in this frame. Therefore, I must start recording or consider it to be an event. I haven't played around much with a despeckle filter. I've left it at its default. And the minimum motion frames, I have set it to 1. The event gap means between one event when it is considered to be over, and the next event is considered to begin, is the gap between the two. I've set it to 60 seconds. The pre-capture and post-capture of 5 has to do with what I talked about, the difference between the difference between the 2 frames. Remember, I said the threshold is 1500, so it's constantly analyzing every frame, and if the subsequent frame exceeds 1500, then it considers that to be an event. But since it has been examining every frame anyway, the pre-capture means include 5 frames from the point in time when you have determined an event to have begun. So if you miss something, you still get some 5 frames ahead of when it thought an event had begun, and continue to capture 5 more frames until you say the event has stopped, which means the change in the current frame and the previous one is less than 1500. That is an indication of the event is over, but continue to capture 5 more frames beyond that. Picture output, I choose best. The picture type is JPEG. I picture quality at 100. Movie output on, in other words, when you have been triggered as an event, make a movie of it. And the maximum time is 60 seconds. One can always increase it if you want. That it should be the MPEG-4 format, and the quality of the movie should be 400,000 bits per second. The quality is 100. Do keep duplicate frames. Don't just discard them. And that has to do now with capturing the movie, an MPEG file, when an event is supposed to have been triggered. The other one that says time-lapse interval of 1 means every second, regardless of whether there was an event or not, continually capture a frame and store it as a separate, I think it's an AVI file. It may not be MPEG. Yeah, I think it's AVI. And create a time lapse of what has been happening every second. And that every hour that time lapse video should be switched over. So in other words, right now it would be recording a time lapse video saying the hour is 1800, so you will have a time lapse underscore 1800.avi, of course, with the date and timestamp. And then in the subsequent hour, it'll become 1900 and so on. So you'll get the full time lapse AVI for every hour. If you want to look at what is happening with the camera, look at settings, changes, settings, etc., there is a web control port, an 8080 port. That gives you an HTML-based page where you can either look at the settings that I'm showing you here, or even change it on the fly if you want. Let's see. Web control, localhost off. I believe I keep that at on. That might be something that I've pulled off incorrectly. I don't recall what the web control arms 0 means. We can look it up because that's an extensive, the conf file that comes with the install has lots of comments before every variable. I just condensed it down so that it would fit in here to talk about the most relevant ones. Now, in addition to this capture happening in the background, there's also one other thing that's happening, and that is where you said you want a picture type of JPEG, when there is an event that has been sensed, it will also capture a JPEG image of that event. Now it judges by that difference of pixels from one frame to the other as to which frame had the greatest amount of information change. Therefore, it says, okay, that particular frame, I'll set it aside as a JPEG file, which can be subsequently emailed to you, etc., but I don't use that feature. But that is really neat, because if you have your camera facing the street and you have vehicles that are going by, that particular snapshot will almost every time give you a photograph of the entire vehicle, almost as it's been stopped midstream in the event. So as I'm looking at the event folder, I can quickly go through the JPEG files and say, okay, every event, what is it that really happened? Without having to review the whole time-lapse file, the hourly time-lapse file in, high speed. It really runs at 1 frame per second. So 30 frames per second go whiz by pretty quickly. Or having to look at individual MPEG files to see, okay, what really is in there. So this makes it really feature rich. Oh, let's see.
It sounds really well thought out.
It's very well thought out. Then the last one is where exactly is the directory where if you had multiple cameras, you could set and give values that are pertinent to multiple cameras. And if there are none over there, it assumes that there's only one camera. So remember when I talked about the Raspberry Pi versus the Ubuntu computer, the desktop computer? In the desktop computer is where, in this particular etc motion conf.b folder, I put the configuration files for those 4 different cameras. Whereas in the Raspberry Pis, which are servicing only one camera, I don't use anything in that folder. That's a very high level explanation of the configuration file, but simultaneously, what are its capabilities? There's also another feature that I haven't used and I haven't shown you because I don't use it, but there is a masking capability whereby you could create a mask on your scenery and you can tell it that as far as this camera is looking out and viewing out there, just employ this mask so that if there's any motion in that masked area, disregard it and don't use it in that threshold of 1500. Why is that useful? That is useful when you have your camera looking outward and you're in a very windy situation and the trees are swaying and all of that, and it would be continually recording because it's seeing those trees as motion. So the masking capability is really useful for circumstances like that.
I have another situation. I have a newish alarm system that I set up at my new house. And the camera was set, at least for a bit, to, let's see, it was set to detect motion.
Just one second. My wife has a question. Yeah. Oh, if you're trying to chase the rabbit out. Okay, got it. With other dogs. Just let it out. No, that's all right, honey. I'll just shut the other door. Sorry, that's our new dog. That's a heck of a squirrel hunter and a rabbit hunter. So sorry, you were stating that you've got a camera in another situation.
Right, so I have a security camera, and when it detects motion, and I'm away from the house, it's going to set off an alarm.
Ah,
And that was working fine. And then when we had workers in the house, I needed to move the location of the camera to a different part of the room.
Mhm.
And after I did that, I found that if I had that option enabled, it would set off false alarms. And what I realized is that in the field of view of the camera was a ceiling fan.
ah,
The worker in the house had turned on the ceiling fan. And so, yeah, if you could mask off that area, that would be real useful.
correct. Yep. Another feature that I really haven't utilized, if some of you remember their Radio Shack and also X10 as X10 Powerhouse, I think it was. The controllers that they were selling that could send signals on your regular household AC wiring to turn devices on and off, etc. This goes back to the 1980s, 1990s. They were offering cameras that had tilt and swivel and all of that. And by the way, motion can interact with the motors, the X and Y motors of swivel cameras. And in fact, I believe, and I've never tried this out, it can follow motion, I believe. I may be wrong, but it's worth trying out for those that are really interested in saying, okay, I want motion tracking, not just motion recording. You may have to play around with some parameters there as to how many incremental pulses need to be sent to the motor such that it turns in accordance with what you want it to do, or just do a left-right sweep, up-down sweep, whatever. So it's capable of that as well. Okay, so next. The standard stuff. And if you want to start it, you would just say sudo service motion start, stop, restart. If you check for status, it will give you a status, as in this case, it's saying active and running since such and such. I've falsified all the data there, but pretty much it's representative of what it is doing. I took the snapshot day before yesterday. What is today? Gosh, I've lost track of the date.
16.
There you go. Yeah, so day before yesterday. Thank you. Any questions so far? Okay. Now let's talk about, whoops, is this the next one? Yeah, it is the next one. There we go. So if you want to view it in real time, you can certainly look at it on your Raspberry Pi through a web browser. You would just say localhost. And since you had defined 8081 as the port to be viewing through, you'll be able to see the video. I've just blacked out the scenery, but you can see in the periphery, it is looking out in the street through the wire mesh window. If you want to look at it from some other computer, you just replace the 3 X's with whatever is the IP address of that Raspberry Pi, and you get the same view. Next topic, Android phones as webcams. So here are the 3 I've played around with. And the software is called IP Webcam. I've shown the icon of the logo so that you know which one you're picking up. This guy has been writing it for quite a while. There's a completely free version that I utilized. For the paid versions and the newer ones, there are a lot more features that are enabled. If you want to pay for it, it's pretty cheap. If you cannot find a version that will work with your older phone, then you can go to APK Pure, and there are multiple versions of those APKs that you can download for that specific Android version. And you get a reduced set of features, but if all you care about is making it work like an IP camera, it works. Now, if you want to look directly at the IP webcam interface, you just plug in whatever is your Android's IP address, where, whatever the NNN is supposed to be. And by default, you can look at its web page on port 8080, where you will see a screen like I show on the right half of it. You can see what your view of the streaming video should be, along with various parameters like, do you want to zoom in, or what is the stream quality, etc., etc. It's a complete web interface into manipulating IP webcam to your liking, including taking a snapshot and all of that. But then that snapshot gets saved to your phone. It doesn't make its way back to the motion server per se. Okay. Remember a while ago, I talked about if you want your desktop motion to be reading these multiple cameras, that's when you would put the configuration of the camera in the conf.d folder. Well, here's an example of how one would do it. You would just basically give it a name. You can give it an ID. Normally, I give it the ID NNN, which is the same as the IP address that I had used for the phone. And then I point to where motion should go get the image from, and that's basically the IP address :8080/video. So that's when it will go pick up just the video portion of it, not all the rest of this, the controls, etc. And then you define what the width and the height of the image are. And then you can say what text do you want to superimpose on that video. And the documentation tells you very clearly what each of those parameters stand for. And you can tailor that to your desire. So you can have a text on the left, you can have a text on the right, and give it the name of the movie file and the picture file, as well as the time-lapse file. If you have questions about motion and you want to get on their, what do you call it, their list server, there's the URL for that. They have a very good support system. The guys are really good about answering questions and solving people's problems. I've been subscribing to their list server for more than a decade. I've not had much use for it because I've used it for quite a long time. I'm familiar with it. And there are features that I really don't use, but there are others that do use it to its, fullest. But it's a great piece of software. I really commend whoever started it, whoever's maintaining it. It's fabulous. And it's free. So, now that I spoke about how the desktop PC is interfacing with the cameras, if you go to the desktop and you say, okay, I want to look at all the cameras, then you would just say localhost 8080. And this is what you would see on a on an HTML page, a web interface. you can see all three cameras. I've just blacked out the image. If you want to see an individual stream, then this is the address that you would choose, and it will show you just one of three or one of the four.
Yeah, you can't just select the camera. Go back to the other screen.
I
Can't you,
believe one can. I believe one can. Yes.
you can't select the word says cameras and tell it which one you want to look at
You
without.
can actually, yeah, you can actually click on the image itself. It'll take you there
Okay, without having to put
without having to type anything. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
But if you do wanted to go the way of saying, I want exactly this one with no interaction, you could say, you know, here's how I want to look at that particular stream, that single stream. That's how you would directly address.
If you had three cameras, is one the host and the other two are attached to the host?
No. The server is the host.
Okay, thank you.
The cameras are all clients. So essentially every Android phone is acting like a webcam. Sorry, what do you call it? A webcam, yeah. Security camera, wireless security camera.
So when you're talking about the IP webcam on a phone, you're talking related to it as it's related to motion, correct?
Okay. This is where things get a little bit confusing, and hopefully I can clarify this for you. IP webcam itself is capable of some of the features that the motion software is capable of, namely detecting motion and capturing motion when it thinks an event has been triggered, emailing you, etc., etc. All of those features are available in the paid version of IP webcam app. I choose only to say, hey, serve out the images as a raw HTML stream, and I will allow my computer to capture it and do all of the analysis that the paid version of the app would have done. Does that clarify it for you?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So I'm using it as basically a dumb webcam or security camera. IP webcam itself is capable of some of the features that motion has. My suspicions are, since the source code for motion is open source, Pavel Klebovich is likely to have taken that and ported it to an Android. And then he is, you know, offering a free version, and he has embellished it to say not only will it give you the image, but you can make it a two-way audio system as well, almost like a Ring camera. You can also utilize every sensor that's there in your smartphone and look at the values of those sensors, graph the sensors, etc. So things like, for instance, the battery voltage, the temperature, the XYZ of the accelerometer, the GPS coordinates, all of those things, because those sensors are available in the camera, the paid version of his software is capable of delivering that to you. In fact, some of the older versions of that IP webcam, I've turned it on and it does work, but the trade-off here is the camera gets warm. Sorry, the phone gets warm if you're making it do all of that. So I tend to use the minimum resources or the minimum load on the Android phones to do what I need it to do. Does that help? Okay.
Yes.
All right, so let me see. Some other things that I have over the years learned. We all know that Raspberry Pis with SD cards, they fail. I've gone through a lot of them until I learned that for running this, there are some techniques I can use. Since those Raspberry Pis have enough memory and they're only running a single task, namely this. I mean, there are other things happening in the background per se, but the heavy load is really running motion. That I can dedicate a portion of RAM to hold a temporary file system, these various temporary file systems, namely /temp, /vartemp, /varlog, and so on and so forth, and thereby reduce the writes to either the SSD or the either the SD or the SSD, whichever be the case. So just a little tidbit. In some cases, I also use this technique when I had, when I was talking about the remote backup Raspberry Pi, I do use TempFS to reduce writes for the log files and so on and so forth. Okay, another side topic. Of course, you're going to build up quite a few files, and your hard disk or SD card or SSD is going to fill up. So there are two techniques. The first one I came across only recently, pretty slick, is to delete files to keep the folder size within a certain GB, and I chose 10. So I put that in the cron tab. Now I prefix it with a sudo because you may or may not have to use sudo depending on whether you as a user have added the group MOTION or motion as one of your groups. And the folders and files that are being written there are being written as motion:motion, user being motion, group being motion. So if you have set your own user ID to be also part of the motion group and given write authority to the group, then you don't have to use sudo. Otherwise, you do have to use and do this stuff as the super user. The second one is simple find and delete files that are older than 5 days. So I use a combination of both. And the shell script behind the delete motion files to maintain a folder size is stated right below. Namely, change to the CD to the motion file, and then list the files, pipe it through awk, and keep testing every time you delete a file, whether you are less than 10 GB. And the calculation right there is if size greater than 10*2 to the power 30, and namely in gigabytes, then if that is true, then remove the file that you just listed. Simple, slick, works.
So how long of a data stream is 10 gigabytes, do you know?
About 2 or 3 days. Now, keep in mind, of course, all of this depends on the resolution of the camera, the resolution, and the duration of the events, the frequency of the events, and so on. So it's a very difficult question for me to answer. You would have to play around with it, and that's why I said mine is an more than a decade-old experiment. As you add more cameras, or you improve the resolution of the cameras, or the frame rate of the cameras, all of that plays into what you would want to choose as your folder limit. I probably sometimes will increase it in saying, hey, I think we're going out for 2 or 3 days. You know, let me increase it and retain some more or longer, etc. It's an answer, but it doesn't directly give you a value. That's the best I can do. Make sense?
All good.
Okay, some side notes. When I was trying to create this presentation, I wanted some pictures. And when I went to get pictures of those really old phones, they all turned out to be .web images, WebP images. I didn't know what the heck .webP images were. I tried to embed this into LibreOffice Impress, and it brought the whole darn page, and so on and so forth. So I needed to find a way to say, okay, take these WebP images of the whole page and just give me the PNG file, and there's the single line conversion. Of course, you have to install an app called WebP, and then that next line that finds all the WebP files and converts them to PNG files. And finally, if you know, when I was trying to extract all the non-commented lines from motion.conf, I sent it through another filter using SED or Stream Editor. That's one of my favorites, is Stream Editor. It's a beauty. I rely on it heavily. Questions, comments, or rewards?
You should put your Cash App account on the screen here. Let's see, what's your coverage with all these systems? Is this all the rooms in a house? Are you doing any outside?
It's a
spaces
combination
or
of both.
any?
Yeah, it's a
What's
combination.
that?
Of both. It's a combination of both, exterior and interior.
Any of these devices you talked about somewhat weatherproof?
They are all inside the house.
They're all inside looking out, some of them looking out through windows. Gotcha.
Correct. Which is the limitation of some of the images you are seeing. Is one of them that was looking through the front. That's why you get that grilled appearance, because it's sitting on the inside. The other limitation is when I said those pilot cams have their own infrared LEDs. When I turned them on, the darn trouble was the glass reflects right back, and all I got was a bright patch of white. So those are considerations you have to keep in mind. In the due course of time, what I learned was when I was researching infrared LEDs, there's a difference in the LEDs, and you can buy two kinds predominantly. One is in the 800 nanometer infrared range, and the other one is in the 900. I believe the 900 has a faint glow. If you want no glow whatsoever, so people don't even know that there's an infrared light shining upon them, get the 800.
I had a question. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mark.
Related to the IP webcam, what I'm looking to, can I use my phone for the IP webcam and display something to a web page, or have a web page point to that image?
Absolutely, yes.
Do I need motion to make that work?
No.
I can just use the IP cam by itself.
That is correct.
Do you think I'll need a pro version of that?
Well, it depends on what you want to do. If all you want to do is continuous streaming, then you don't need the Pro version. But if you do get the Pro version, there are options. You have to look up the website. I think he gives you options to say you can stream it to the cloud and so on and so forth. But I am so averse to streaming anything to the cloud that it's like, that's not of value to me. I want it to be streaming to me, to my own hardware, my own location. So it depends on your use case.
Yeah, I got a radio control airplane club, and I want to use a camera to point at the runway to see who's there. But I don't want continuous motion because I'll probably use a solar camera. But I want a web page to look at it at an image, the same image every 15 minutes or every 30 minutes, you know, whatever I tell it to do.
For which? But in which case, I would strongly recommend trying to set up motion because it is very, very reliable. Now, let me go back to the configuration file and show you what you can do. I'm trying to find that page. Give me a moment.
Well, I was thinking about using the IP webcam while I'm actually at the field.
While you're at the field.
Yeah, just for demo purposes. But go ahead and show me what you're talking about.
So you want to use it purely like a video camera and record events on the field?
Yeah, but not necessarily video, but
just snapshots.
Yeah, snapshots. I used to do it a long time ago on my computer, and I could tell it how often to do it. I had the camera pointed out to my window.
Got it. Okay.
But that's been 20 years ago or more.
Yeah, for which I would suggest a different piece of software. Time-lapse photography app. What I do have somewhere on another phone is a time-lapse video capture that is also, here are two things that are very important to me. That it minimally uses data, or I can ask for the data to be deleted, or never uses any of my data, information, personal information. So I go about looking for apps that say no data collected, no data shared with third parties. Those are the two criteria that get me interested in the first place. The third one is no ads. But if they do ply me with ads, because I'm using everything inside my house to begin with, I can block them using my Raspberry Pi hole, and saying, okay, these are the websites I ban, which generally bans a lot of them. So in your particular case, I wouldn't recommend IP webcam, but I would recommend a time-lapse photographing app.
Okay. Well, when you're done with the presentation, I would like to be a co-host. I have something to share that's related to related to your presentation.
Okay, but let me just make one small point here. You can also do what you wanted over here, as I'm showing in the configuration file, is you could just say time-lapse interval right here is 1 second. Whoops. I lost the page. Time-lapse interval is 1 second. You can change it to whatever you want it to be. And you could turn off the other features of, motion sensing and all of that, saying that's irrelevant to me.
Right.
And I just want to do time-lapse photography at every second or every 5 seconds or every 1 hour or whatever.
Okay.
But really a time-lapse app is the more appropriate choice for you.
Okay.
I'm done. Any other questions before I say presentation over.
Have you interfaced this with any other kinds of systems, any home automation or anything else?
No, but I did try other stuff like when I mentioned the X10 system, I did play around with Home Assistant, I believe it is, HA.
Uh-huh.
I succeeded to a limited extent, but I am not. You see, the X10 system is really old. It is not reliable. And it's not reliable because it superimposes a spike at the appropriate time of the 60 hertz cycle, which has to be captured by the receiving device faithfully. And any spike in your electrical system is disruptive to that communication. So when you ask it to turn something on, it is sent twice because they know that such things can happen. But in spite of that, it is unreliable. That is the extent of my knowledge and experimentation with home automation. I have not used this particular device or setup with home automation, although there is a feature in the configuration file to say, upon an event, I want you to do this, and you define what the this is, which could then be a call to anything else. Send you an email, whatever, correct? So it's possible, but I have not done it.
Gotcha.
What was the URL for Motion website?
Hold on.
Or if I was to Google it?
Well, these are the two places where you can find information about it.
Okay.
Your easiest option to install it is, if you're using Ubuntu or Raspbian, is sudo apt-get or aptitude. You don't have to bother about downloading stuff and all of that.
Okay, I bookmarked it. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Kumar? All right.
Bruce,
Thank
go
you very
ahead.
much.
Thank you.
That was awesome.
I do have a related subject to what he was doing as a presentation, just to show an alternative. It's to
Great.
show something I did. If you can make me a host.
Sure. Sure, hang on just a second.
Okay.
Anyway, I wanted to say thank you, Kumar. Thank you very much. And I really appreciate all the work you put into this presentation. Thank you.
I enjoy the group, guys. I've enjoyed it all these years.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well. It was great presentation.
Thank you, sir.